Beep boop. Hello. Um, this YouTube video will be about Batman thinking, privilege, and the poor. So, part of the whole reason for this YouTube channel to exist, despite it becoming something mildly else, was to deal with Batman thinking, which is the way that most Americans think, or at least most Americans I've been exposed to, and the way that I personally, for quite some time, have thought. This last one, not so much lately. In America, well, first let me put a pre. What is the word? What's the word? Uh, a prologue about privilege. Privilege is not something to be ashamed of. It is something to be aware of, but it is not something to be ashamed of. Privilege is normal and fine, but it is when it makes you judge others, that's when it becomes bad. When it makes you, start saying, oh, they're not working hard enough, which ties to the next thing. In America, being poor is considered a sin and a choice. A lot of people think that if you're poor, it's because you've made bad choices in life and that you've done something to cause the fact that you're poor. So a lot of people, when they look at poor families, they will find little nitpicky details that they can blame on them being poor, whereas a person who had not started in the negative would be fine for them to do. A person of average money would not be blamed for drinking some and smoking some. But a poor person, the moment that they acknowledge that they were poor, I would be, oh, it's because you drink too much, or oh, it's because you smoke too much. Whereas people who come from middle class backgrounds, that's never the reason that they're middle class. It's never considered the reason. Also, there's lots of rich people that also have these habits, but are not judged upon them. So for poor people, it is generally considered to be a sin that you're not trying hard enough. And more so from previous generations to the current generation. Be like, well, when I was a kid, you could do this and this and this. But it's based on the fact that when they were a kid, it was much cheaper to do those things. There's a lot of math involved in the next part, but I'm going to ask you to trust me because there's tons and tons of videos on this online if you're actually interested in the math. But there is a dramatic difference between how much people got paid by comparison to how much things cost. In the 70s, when I was born, you could work a summer job and afford a car. You could buy a car outright at the end of the summer. Or you could feed a family of 4 with one full-time job that was, semi-decent. This is not the case right now. And I have friends who come from privilege, and that, again, perfectly not anything they need to be ashamed of, but they come from privilege and they're surprised about the things other people have had to do, and they get kind of judgy about things that other people have had to do. One friend, and I'm not going to name them, is a wonderful person, genuinely, but they occasionally will say things like, well, you spend $10 on lunch. If you saved $10 every day, and that's $300 in a month, and that's $900 in 3 months, you could go to Disneyland too. And that's not the case for a lot of people, because a lot of people don't spend $10 on lunch every day. And they also, and so it's basically, the implication that you're not trying hard enough.
There's also a balance
But
of time and mental energy.
yeah, but not going to get into that. That's a whole different equation. Anyway, and there are a lot of people who believe that poor people who are coping with the fact that they're poor through drug use or alcohol or whatever, it's their fault. They clearly made those decisions poorly. And there is also a large contingent of America that believes that doesn't understand that there is poor people thinking and rich people thinking. Rich people thinking teaches you to save because you've always got extra money. And rather than just have a little bit more luxury, you could save. Whereas poor people, if you only get luxury once a year, you tend to splurge so that you can enjoy that, so that you can feel that, so that you can have the feeling of being a normal person who doesn't have to worry about money. This also causes lots of problems on payday. But that's a whole different set of thinking. And there's a whole bunch of people who are like, well, why didn't they just save? Well, a lot of people don't have the ability to save. And this is a normal problem with people in America believing that if people just made right choices, then they'd be in exactly the same spot as them. Not thinking about the fact that A, they had parents that were able to make those choices and train them in those choices. B, they had parents who they never went hungry, or they never didn't have a roof over their head, or they never thought they were going to get kicked out. And it's one of those things where I had a very dear friend who didn't understand poor people logic, so it went the other way around. And so because of that friend, who is one of my best friends in the world, I had missed a single car payment. And the car company, because it was in a lower end district, sent somebody to collect it. And they showed up at this friend's house, banged on the door, and she immediately told them where we were. And so they showed up at our house in the middle of the night, banged on our door, and offered, if we gave them the key, to let us get our stuff out of the car. And so it was a melodramatic situation in which a friend accidentally, because she was raised in privilege, did not know that you don't tell other people, you don't tell anyone where someone lives. If they bang on the door, you don't give them an address. That's ridiculous. No one does that. But people who are raised in privilege don't know that. And it's one of those things where, so it goes both directions. The real problem, though, is when people who have never known hunger judge somebody else on how they handle hunger. When people who have always known comfort are like, well, why didn't you just pay the electricity bill? And it's like Batman saying, well, why didn't you just buy the block where your house was and then you wouldn't have to worry about ever moving? It's very, very Batman thinking. And it's very, very much the kind of thing where, oh no, the Joker burned down one of my safe houses. I will have to walk an extra 2 blocks to another safe house. There is this element of just ignorance based on prejudice. And this also ties to, my wife and I are some of the only people who were poor in the U.S. who made it somewhere else. Somehow we got to Sweden. And how we did that was by just about liquidating everything we owned. So most of our friends who are in Sweden who are from American countries, or American countries, who are from America or other English-speaking countries, they grew up in families who traveled all the time, or who never didn't have a vacation, or never stayed home because they couldn't afford to go out. So a lot of those people were not ever poor. And because they were not ever poor, they don't really understand how weird it is for us to be here and to see them be like, oh, I'm so poor, I can't afford to go out, but I'm going to go to Russia this week. And it's one of those things where it comes up a lot, where it's just like they drop everything and disappear for a week because they just needed to. So for us, it's super weird because we grew up in a place where most people were poor. Most of our students were poor. Some of the people that we taught never left 10 miles outside there where they were born. They'd just been going around in that same area their whole life. So for us, we're constantly aware of our privilege. We're constantly aware of the fact that we are incredibly lucky and that this is magical and everything is, that even just going to the grocery store is still magical here because it's like nothing at home. And it's, it's one of those things where these videos started in some ways as a way of showing people back home, hi Violet, showing people back home how different it is, because they may never get to go. They may never get to come over here. They may never get to go over anywhere. Some of them, the idea of moving 100 miles away is huge, because you'll never see the people you grew up with again, because they're not going to travel. So even though, everybody has cars because you have to in America, because public transport is almost non-existent, but everybody just stays where they are with those cars. It's kind of insane. The main point of all this, though, is that we should realize that there are some people who make bad choices and make bad decisions and end up poor. But there are also some people who start in the negative and have worked so hard to get to the positive. And we shouldn't look down on them because they had to work so hard and they still haven't reached what we consider normal. So before we judge people for being poor, and this is one of the main things that I talk about with privilege, and everybody hates the word, and everybody's like, oh, check your privilege, and oh, you're triggered, and oh, but no, we should realize that we are privileged. That's a normal thing. It's nothing to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be particularly proud of, but it's something that we should be aware of, because it allows us to understand that somebody else might have started at -5 and just got to 1, whereas we started at 7 and went to 8, and that's huge. So privilege we have to be aware of, and it's part of our Batman thinking, and I'm trying really, really hard to work on that as a part of my thinking. Beep boop. Thank you for listening to me for my serious one. If you made it to this point in the YouTube video, thanks for watching. Hope you're well. Bye.